Hello, welcome to week 5, in which we'll be studying chapter 6 of the Moral Compass. This chapter focuses on what we call non-consequentialist ethical theories, introducing us historically to two of the earliest versions of that way of thinking. Non-consequentialist theories, unlike the consequentialist views that you looked at in chapter 5, argue that something other than just how things turn out has to be a factor in our ethical judgments. So in your last assignment, when you looked at John's case study through the lens of utilitarianism, as you addressed the options that you came up with in your identification analysis assignment, utilitarianism tells us that we ought to select the option that's going to make the most people happy, right? So it produces the greatest possible balance of happiness over unhappiness for the greatest possible number. So that's all about outcomes, right? How things turn out. Non-consequentialists say, well, yeah, how things turn out might matter, but something else is going to be important too. Or other non-consequentialist views, particularly the ones you'll see in chapter 7, might say, well, look, it doesn't matter how things turn out. There's some really important characteristic that no matter what the outcomes are, we shouldn't violate, or things that we should promote. So the first two theories we'll see in the non-consequentialist field are virtue ethics and natural law theory. These are two of the older theories of ethics, having their roots in ancient Greece and medieval Europe. They're related primarily through the idea that there's something about the nature of things, or reality as it's made, that tells us how things ought to be, right? So there's a kind of inherent moral orderliness to reality in the universe that we live in, right? Which shouldn't be too strange an idea. I think as you guys get into natural law theory, most of you will be familiar with sort of the view of the world that informs that, right? Both through the ancient Greeks and through Western culture and religion. So in the unit, most of your assignments will focus on both of the theories, but your application is really only going to narrow down on the one. It'll be applying natural law theory. And the reason that that's the way that it is because virtue ethics isn't really the same kind of theory as everything else that we're talking about. Right? It doesn't have a kind of central principle that we can all use to decide whether our action is right or wrong. It's more about developing your own personal character over time, and that's going to be a little bit different for each of us. So rather than being focused on individual actions and choices that someone like John might have to make, it would focus on how John becomes a better person, right? Which is not something that we can observe at a given moment. So for this unit's assignment, you'll apply the principle from natural law theory. So let me show you guys where to find that and sort of talk you through what the expectations are. I don't think that you'll find that it's too much different than what we've been doing so far. So if you go to the module for week 5, non-consequentialist theories part 1, you scroll down into the chapter assignments, you'll find the natural law theory application assignment little folder there. Click into it, and you'll find the instructions linked here. By the time you look at it, you'll also see a video link there that has this video. So once you click in there, it'll open a document that looks pretty much exactly like the one that you guys have seen before for the ACT Utilitarian application assignment. It basically talks you through a series of steps about how I want you to do this, right? So once again, in order for this assignment to make sense, you'll have to have completed the identification and analysis assignment from chapter 4, right? In particular, you need to have your options laid out and your stakeholders well understood, right? Now, unlike utilitarianism, you're not going to be thinking about how each option affects each individual person, but it is still important that you're working with the same set of options that you started with, or the set of options that you've made after my feedback. So before you get started with this, make sure that you've read the chapter, that you've watched the videos relevant to natural law theory, in particular its application, because that will help make this process a little bit easier, right? So review the virtual brothel case, and then have your identification analysis assignment handy, because you'll need those options. Okay, so your first written paragraph here should be a statement and explanation of the central principle, or the basic principle of natural law theory, right? So I want you to quote it word for word. And I think the reason I'm doing that is I want you guys to commit these things to memory, right? It will help you study if you understand the wording of these principles. So give me the exact wording of the natural law principle. This one's pretty simple. It's only a handful of words. Good is to be done and pursued, and evil avoided. That's the wording of the principle. But as it stands, the principle is vague, and it doesn't really mean anything until we understand what good is and what evil is. Right? So in your explanation of the principle, I want you to flesh that out for me. Right? Good is to be done and pursued, and evil avoided. But what does good mean? Well, once you get into the unit, you'll see that Thomas Aquinas says that more than one thing is good, in distinction to some of our other ethical theories. The utilitarians say it's happiness or pleasure. Aquinas is going to say, no, it's 6 things. So I want you to explain the list of 6 universal human goods to me, and then explain to me how they connect up with that principle that good is to be done and pursued and evil avoided. In brief, and I want you guys to flesh this out a little bit more as you explain it to me, options that promote one of the universal human goods are going to be morally right. Options that interfere with any of the universal human goods are going to be morally wrong. And I think you guys will find that this principle is particularly relevant to the case study that you guys have been working through in what it recommends or forbids as being ethical options. So then that's the next step. Once you've stated and explained the principle, right, in your own words, make sure that the explanation is in your own terms, so you show me that you understand it rather than just copying what's in the textbook. I then want you to apply the principle to each of the options from your analysis chart. Now, this shouldn't be another chart, right? So in utilitarianism, you might have drawn and made another net utility chart, and that would have been fine. But here, I want you to write out a paragraph for each option, right? And explain whether or not that option is ethical or unethical, given this natural law principle. Right. So if an option interferes with one of the universal human goods, if it violates one of the 6 things on that list, then the option is not ethical. And it doesn't matter any other things about how things turn out. If it violates one of those human goods, option's forbidden. If, on the other hand, an option promotes those universal human goods, or some of those universal human goods, or one of them, well, then it might be ethical, right? Because it's promoting those things that we're supposed to pursue. But don't just tell me whether or not they do or don't violate or promote one of these goods. I want you to explain it to me, right? So explain to me why, if John does this, it's going to help one of these universal human goods, or if John does that, it's going to interfere with one of those universal human goods. So think of each of your options as requiring a short paragraph to explain basically why the option is right or wrong according to natural law theory, right? Okay, then finally, just state briefly, this is the option that you think the theory would pick, right? Which is the most correct choice given that point of view. Again, just like with the Act Utilitarian assignment, this isn't your judgment about what you think is the best choice. It might be different from what the theory says, but I want you to show me you can think through this as if you're an adherent or a believer of natural law theory, right? So state and explain the principle as clearly as you can, state the principle's exact wording, explain it in your own words, tell me what that principle is all about, then use that principle to judge each of the options you came up with in your identification and analysis assignment to decide whether it's ethical or unethical, and then finally say, this is the one that the natural law theorist would pick. Just like with all of our papers, I expect you guys to try to do your best to format them in proper college formatting. There's the link to the Purdue OWL website right here. The link will be active, and that can help you get your paper set up. That includes things like page numbers and all that sort of stuff. So make sure that your line spacing is correct and so on. Apart from that, I think you guys pretty much, you're well on your way. Let me know if you have questions. I'm happy to help out. And just as a preview, your next assignment will basically be more of the same, right? You'll look at a different ethical theory in chapter 7, but basically go through the same series of steps. State the principle's exact wording, and then explain it in your own words, then apply it to the options that you came up with in your analysis. All right, have a good week.